Everyone, Farshad here. Can you all hear me okay? What we're going to do is, first of all, thank you for joining. We'll probably wait a few minutes as everybody joins the Zoom session. In terms of, I guess, how we're going to run this, this is our first virtual OWASP meetup that we've had. So we'll figure things out as we go along. I see some questions being asked on the chat. First one about asking questions, Amiran is mentioning. So I think, Amiran, I think the best thing would be that when people have questions, they could post it on the chat and I will moderate that and I'll bring it up. And if people want to talk, there's no reason not to, but let's moderate it to the chat. So I'll say, for example, that Eugene has a question, and then Eugene, go ahead. And you can either type it there or feel free to do that. Hey, can we turn off the chime when people come in and leave the meeting? Yes, Jivan, let me take a look at see how we could do that. Thank you for that. And by the way, you're all muted. If you do want to speak, you can unmute yourself, and we will get started in a couple more minutes. We have about, we're supposed to have a full house. We had about 100 people register, which was what I had said the capacity to, which is the capacity of this Zoom bridge. And initially, this was supposed to happen at the Cisco office where they could host up to 70 people. And I think we were looking like we were going to have about 40 people or so. But this morning, as the notification mentioned, we discussed it with them and internally with the OWASP Vancouver team. And the decision was made that this makes the most sense. And, this is something new to try. So why not try something different? And also it allows us to record this as we're going much easier. And this is being recorded, by the way, and we'll try to make it available on the YouTube channel for OWASP Vancouver. If you're not sure where that YouTube channel is, you can go to OWASP Vancouver's page. Just Google OWASP Vancouver. It'll take you to our main page within the OWASP GitHub. We recently migrated to that. Thanks to Amiran for all the efforts for that migration. And there you can find out a link to the events pages, past events, as well as our YouTube channel. But I'm sure if you also Google OWASP Vancouver YouTube, you'll find it. Okay, so Jack, are you ready? Are you there?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Hey, Jack, how's it going?
Good.
Good to see you. Excellent, excellent. And well, I see your screen. Everything looks good. So if you're ready, when you're ready, let me know, and I'll do the introductions, and we can move forward with your presentation.
Yeah. Am I in full screen mode?
Yes, yeah, it looks good. Full screen, absolutely. So Jack, I'll do the introduction. So Jack's talk is about building a validator for SaaS providers' reason for accessing customer data. So he'll tell you all about it. He's a product security engineer at Zenefits with a passion for user privacy and the law of data security. Combined with experience as a software developer, Jack helps bring the product, engineering, and security teams together to build an excellent product that secures customer data and respects individuals' privacy. We're very excited to have him as part of this session. And with that said, I'll turn it over to you, Jack.
Yeah, it's very humbling to be able to present. It's really nice to meet everyone. Shame I couldn't meet you in person, but maybe the online format is better for the time being. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can unmute yourself, shout it out. I love the conversation. And just quick show of hands, maybe through the chat, I want to see if how many of us are working for a SaaS provider, SaaS company right now. And hopefully this is a very common problem that we can all solve together. Let me see the chat. Okay, I see some plus ones. Yep, plus ones, a lot of plus ones. And this question is loaded question. Yeah, keep on typing there, guys. Okay, yeah, a lot of us. The second question is a very loaded question. Who's a SaaS user, SaaS product user? I say loaded. That's because that's everyone. From the early days of the modern days of using Facebook to exactly emails. That's all SaaS products, and the proliferation of SaaS product is not slowing down. It's accelerating, and everything is becoming a SaaS product. Yeah, Jeevan, I'm watching the chat, so you guys can type in your questions there. So yeah, this presentation is based on a white paper that I wrote as a part of my master's degree program at SANS, and this really brings down the question of SaaS companies have a lot of customer data. So even here, Zoom or any product that have your personal information, and depending on what the product is, there's a lot more sensitive information that the SaaS companies get to have, and also on top of being able to aggregate a large data set, you are really out there in the open at the mercy of the SaaS companies. So I also work for a SaaS company. This company does benefits, payroll, and HR function. So it has all your pretty much all the sensitive information you can have. So really, I have a lot of questions for SaaS products. How do they keep it? Who gets to view it? And if somebody internal views it, for what reason? And for most of the product, if not all, that's a black box for everyone, other than people working inside the company. And sometimes within inside the company, that's also a black box for a lot of people. So this white paper was about being able to bring visibility to the customers. This is more of a baby step one item. So the objective of nothing as a service user, yep, okay, one, Mark. Objective is to understand the typical SaaS companies use for interacting with customer data. There are a lot of legitimate reasons for it. So wanted to not demonize all the SaaS companies out there, and trying to understand how a security team can build a monitor function that can first record the access events, and also being able to validate the reason without people actually typing in all the time the reason every time that they need to access the customer data, which is not very scalable. And also we're looking at shifting from role-based permission to need-based. So a customer support agent its job function is to help customer issues. So they may have to look at customer issues, customer data, but away from the role-based to need-based, meaning if a customer doesn't have a problem and the customer has no tickets with you, there's no reason for you to actually look up that data. So going towards the need-based. So I'm just wondering if your organization already solved this question, and if you have a very similar capability in how you built that out. So maybe at the end of the session, it'd be very interesting to hear from your side on how you guys did it. Here's some of the why. As you know, CCPA and GDPR requirements are being widely required now. CCPA came in effect this year, January of this year, being enforced maybe in mid this year. And that requires for what I call a modern privacy capabilities, modern privacy tech for your company, primarily for being able to delete data, user data, when they request it, and also being able to port out that data in a readable format. And that are prompting a lot of companies to actually look into developing this privacy program, privacy capability. And it's also building this function out is a perfect opportunity for your security team to get closer to the business and know what they're doing, know what their business function is, and being able to understand the access patterns of how different teams have different requirements and how they access customer data to do their job function, and also opportunity to change the culture because you get to talk to a lot of them, and also a great time to talk to teams about customer data privacy and being able to really minimize the access events. So SaaS companies and Thanks, Simon. Yeah, changing culture is the most challenging aspect. Definitely, it's also very taxing requirement on the security professionals as well. Building out, certifications, requirements is the easy part now. Talking to people and trying to influence the other teams is the most taxing part. I agree. A SaaS company have different teams. Typically, customer support team that's should be when a customer has an issue, they're the one helping them, and that requires looking up the data set to figure out what could be wrong. And also, the implementation team is the team that when a new customer signs up for your service, they need help setting up their accounts. So the implementation team handles a lot of customer data, a lot of in bulk sizes. Initially, let's say you've got 100 users signing up for your service. They send you all the information in bulk, and the implementation team helps to get set up quickly and get you up and running. Customer success managers or advisors, they occasionally check on customers to see how you're doing, whether you're using the full feature, whether you're enjoying the product or not. Engineering team, when there's a bug, engineering team needs to solve it, and sometimes the way customers describe it doesn't give you the full picture. So sometimes you need to look at customer data to either reproduce and also validate the fix they do. And as business grows, workforce, the size grows, and their job functionality complex also increases. So the first challenge is to how would you find the choke point to capture the customer data access events happening? So how would you know who's accessing what, and how would you be able to capture that at scale? Here's a little diagram, very simplified diagram. Canary records. Great idea. It's very Canary's concept is very interesting. Maybe you can go back to it. Here's a very simplified view. Here you have the customer at the right bottom, accessing your SaaS products, usually through your web application or mobile devices that are ending up fetching data from your core database. And then on the top, you have your customer support team, engineers, success managers, whatnot in your internal team, trying to access that data as well. And you don't give full access to raw access to database. You usually build out a tool or interface for them to look up this data. And I call that internal customer data access web portal, usually web-based. You may be doing it as a desktop application, other means, but you would have some kind of central point. You would have this application doing that. So that becomes a good choke point. You may have other team members, other avenues accessing this database other than this web portal or the central application portal that you have built, that you may have. But the first effort is to get people not use the other avenues, because you wouldn't have the perfect monitoring capabilities there, and trying to funnel people to be all using this one central place so it can have a good choke point. You could have different access avenues, but then your monitor function has to be built into other avenues as well. So the first step is to record a common sense who accessed which customer, and when was it accessed, and what would be the best way to build out a monitor function. I had to explore a couple of ways in implementing this, and the next few slides discusses what was considered pretty generalized. So the first thought I had was to build the monitor function between the database and your internal customer data access web portal. So looking at all the database transactions you can capture. I think somebody's not muted, but so by capturing that transaction between your internal web portal application to your database, you can record which object is being accessed, and it can be very granular. So you can even you'd be theoretically even see which table, which object, which row, and which field. So it can be very granular. But the problem in implementing this at scale would be calculation. There'd be a lot of calculation performance issues because the database transactions are very rigorous, and also trying to figure out. So you have an object in your database, and trying to figure out who this object belongs to. That's another database lookup. So you have to do the relational lookup of figuring out what this object is, and also who's the owner of this object is. Which is another representation in your database somewhere of representing your customer. So that became, so that was the first way considered. The second way considered was to have a reverse web proxy between your web portal and your users. And looking at that, you can inspect the URLs, the path that was being used. And typically on a web ad URL, you would have a customer ID as a part of it, or it can be, if it's not in the path, one of the payload would represent your customer's unique ID. So it is really cheap to parse that out and then record that. So if in this example, you have the hello.com/customer/account 1234. 1234 would be the customer unique ID. So whenever that the request path is coming in, you can parse it out and you can record that. Okay, so customer ID 1234 accounts is being accessed. So in this view, you wouldn't have the granularity of which customer data field was accessed. For example, you wouldn't know whether customer's birthday was accessed, whether customer's address was accessed. You wouldn't have that view. However, you can very broadly say we know that this customer account information was looked up in a very broad sense. However, in this reverse proxy view, I wouldn't have the context, the user context of who's actually viewing the customer data. So the login authentication context would be lost. So you can have another module to be for your web portal to your reverse proxy about that authenticated session information, and actually look up who's the logged in user. But that's also maybe adds a little bit more complexity, and also gives you the implementation cost could be a little bit high. But I found that parsing out the customer unique ID is a very cheap way to do this. So the third way consider was to actually just build it as a part of the module of your internal web application that accommodates your internal stakeholders in accessing customer data. In that sense, you'd have the authenticated session context, so you can also record who's accessing which customer data, and that would be a non-repudiation because you'd have to authenticate that's part of your application process. And you can cheaply parse out the customer ID being accessed. So in this case, once again, you wouldn't have the granularity. You wouldn't be able to easily record which customer data set was accessed, but you'd be able to still be able to record that this user account in general sense was accessed. So this approach was taken to build it out. And second step was to validate. This really goes back to the sticking to the need-based validation. So finding a record that proves the need. If you're a SaaS company or any other company, you would have some sort of ticketing system. So customer relationship managers, management software, widely used. One is Salesforce. That captures all the customer interaction coming in. So whether customer is calling in or having a chat or having an email support ticket being filed, usually most of the cases it funnels through that. So they would have a record there living in to represent if the customer is having an issue. You also have a engineering bug tickets. Widely used software is Jira or Asana, or those kind of ticketing system gets also used. From CRM to bug tracking, there could be multiple tickets. When customer support team cannot resolve it, they can spin off and create an engineering ticket for the engineering team to look at these issues. Also, you have internal work items. So it could be a very homegrown ticketing system, internal ticketing system, or a task list system that you may have. And the next step is to interview the teams and know what kind of tickets they're creating, in what scenario they create those tickets, how you can find it, where they are buried, how their workflows are defined. That's the actual tough part. So treating like a treasure hunt, series of interviews with different teams and trying to find out how they operate, and finding the digital footprint, digital tickets that represents their work items, and also how those ticketing items have ID stamped with it. So uncovering workflows, initial interviews were taken, usually approaching them by saying, you're not being audited at all, relax. And that gets people smiling again. It was a good experience. A lot of people kind of, they go very rigid and they freak out when you approach them. So it was really good to just say out that they're not being audited or in any kind of trouble. I'm trying to understand their workflow, trust their team, how they handle customer tickets, customer issues. So each team is very unique, I found, and the purpose of interviewing is to say that one size fits all does not work. So you have to listen and learn and be humble, what they do, what their job function is. And this gave me a really great opportunity to learn about the business operation and get closer to the business. And introduce the actual technical bits about how we can build a validator function. Modern systems all have API capabilities. So your CRMs, Salesforce, Jira, your messaging system like Slack, they all have APIs that you can leverage. So as long as you have the customer unique ID or some sort of key that you can use to look up whether this customer has an issue filed with you, you can use that to make queries, and the system can do it for you rather than you manually looking for it. So API calls, calling out to various systems to capture those records, find those records to see if there's either a open ticket or a recently closed ticket, because your customer team may have resolved the issue yesterday, but you could be looking at the access events from just before, just after. Here's a sample validation run that you can do. So on the left column, you have the access customer IDs, and you have in the middle column, whether the there was a record found or not. And one interesting behavior I saw from these records, I sometimes saw one customer data being accessed by multiple folks, which was a good indication they're swarming the ticket to solve it together. A lot of times, customer support agent teams, if you're tier 1 and you cannot solve it, it has the complexity, then you sometimes reach out to the level 2 or 3 and specialists to consult them, and they also look up customer data, try to find that troubleshoot together. So in this case, this user has accessed 6 customer accounts. 5 of them was accounted for. 1 of them there was no record found. But in this case, on the 5th column, you had Jack, Brenda, and Joyce all accessing that account together. So it's probably, yes, unvalidated means in this case, I couldn't find any record from CRM or the ticketing system, engineering ticketing system that associated with that customer. So the next slides. Okay, so here's some of the sample. In this case, validation type was CRM, customer relationship management, and here's the link to that case. So I could go look at what kind of case it was in case you need to do an audit or you need to maybe profile that access a little bit more. The third one was a bug ticket, issue 1234 representing that ticket. So here's a really interesting stat that was gathered. On the left side, you have the different departments: support team, customer support team, and customer advisors, engineering, others. One data point that I noted was the access volume. So you could have customer support team having a large access volume because they're the first line of handling customer tickets, customer issues. Engineering and others had low. Implementation team had the highest, interestingly, because they are intaking a lot of new client information, trying to set them up. Lot of customer tickets are found in the CRM, obviously, because they are the first funnel to capture all that interaction. And for any tickets that needed to be passed on to the engineering, that went on to the bug tracker. And also, interestingly, within the organization I work for, there are a lot of demo accounts, test accounts that people try to reproduce the issue. Yeah, somebody's drawing. Engineering had 0% test account access. Yeah, if you want to elaborate why you find that engineering interesting, that'd be good. Yeah, engineers typically don't really try to. They have the local dev environment, so any of the test account or the demo account testing they need to do, they have another, they have their local environment setup. So that's why I assume you wouldn't typically have the engineers go access demo accounts, and typically that was used by the sales and other marketing folks. I have a question: how are these stats gathered? I gathered those in the period of 4 weeks. So after the implementation, so the way I calculate the stats is I looked at the top 5 access users within departments, which represents they are the sort of the power users of the internal customer data access web application. So sample sizes of these top users, each department, and I ran the validation of them, and then you this sort of the results, and then it was a simple counting of what's validated and what's not. What is the volume of records that are analyzed? I I can't disclose it, but typically I can share that a customer support team, one customer support team would handle they have a SLA of handling 50 to upwards to 100 to 200 cases per day. So some are like really simple cases, some are really complex cases, but they would have a set of customer tickets they have to handle. So I was really surprised that they're really working at a high speed. So building a validator like this and possibly being an active gate later on, it's very important not to decrease their productivity. So it has to be very seamless. So the volume of that, it really depended on the team. So and that volume was upward to 50 to 100 access per day. That's like really on the high side. Engineering team, for example, it's very, very low because the engineering ticket they end up getting is very very small. So a lot of these customer support teams can solve it, and there are actually sometimes there are actual bugs that ends up to the engineering queue. So that'd be like 1 or 2 company access, customer access per day for engineers who are on the rotation to handle to solve these customer tickets. So there are uncaptured workflows. So in these stats, you see, let's say, in these scenarios, for there are some of the uncaptured workflows. That doesn't necessarily mean that these internal employees have access to customer data inappropriately. Most of the cases, there are workflows that I haven't been able to capture, haven't found that source to validate. For example, one of the implementation team had a specific object in Salesforce, and these were custom implementations in Salesforce. So I had to interview that team and say, okay, so I did the validation run and go back to them, say, hey, I found these records. However, I couldn't find record for these access events. Can you help me? Can you run through how you end up accessing that? So looking through them and looking at how they work, you say, oh, okay, so that's where you look up in Salesforce, and that's how your work queue gets built up, and you can reverse engineer where those objects are. So if you do that multiple times, your percentage of coverage will increase. However, it's like your effort to do that at some point will not be worth getting it to 100%, which is like sort of the next step after this implementation of if you had access events you couldn't really validate, and your average percentage of your coverage, say, is 95% for this specific team, I would say that is good enough for now. And for those 5% that's not accounted for, then you can either have a feedback loop to say, hey, either team members have to retroactively give you the reason why they accessed that, or have some kind of active gating at a later point. So some of the uncaptured workflows to think about, customers would have a similar past issues. So let's say if you're a customer support agent and you kind of remember, oh yeah, the other customer had that issue 2 months ago. Let me look up how it was resolved and what root cause is. Then that support agent would look up the other customer data, but that customer wouldn't have an open ticket right now, but you would have the similar issue before. And also solving a underlying issue that haven't affected the other customers yet, but it will at later point. So you want to, there are cases where you say, okay, I solved this problem for this customer, but I would know that 10 other customers would have that issue. Let me go look up their data and confirm. That's a very legitimate access reason. Also have teams that have book of business. So customer success managers, even though the customer doesn't have a issue, they sometimes go check up on the customer list they're responsible for, and sometimes you have to look up and refresh yourself who they are, what kind of issue they had before, whether things are going well and whatnot. So book of business concept was an important one. You also had contract renewal periods where sales team might be wanting to upsell and maybe have to look at customer data information specifically. The way you want to solve it is try to push all this data to Salesforce, where or any of the customer relation management software that give the Salesforce the metadata required for to their job, but not have these ability to look up customer data. And Salesforce sales folks actually understand this, and they are very happy to do that. They actually want to do that. So maybe you may have your sales team in the similar situation. And also onboarding, offboarding, when people want to get off your platform or get on your platform, there may be cases where implementation teams and whatnot needs to do that. And that's kind of sometimes hard to capture. These customers may be the one that are just signing up, so you have all the accounts set up. So this is just as a starting point. So acknowledging that CRM, the bug tracking system, may not have all the records that you may need. Also create a relational data back discussion, and being able to show that each team say, hey, these are the list of access events that you guys had. These are the ones that are accounted for. I want to understand the other bits that I couldn't find records for, and that goes really well, rather than trying to, hey, why did you access this, to I'm trying to find your records, which everyone should have. It's really, it was excellent opportunity to gain insights to business functions. So the future implementation research is the using this data to profile a access behavior. So access behavior analysis and analytics engine. So you can have a normal volume of people doing their job, and then you have a spike or abnormal events, volume events, that can be a good indicator for you to go dive and be alerted and look at. And also implementing a active gating mode, where in real time, if you build this really well, you can go validate in real time, and also block people from accessing customer data if you cannot find their records. Obviously, you want to be very careful for not making anyone's job harder, but with a good engineering solution, hope to do this in the future. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. I'll open up the mic for questions.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Jack. Yeah, if you've been holding back those questions, it's the time to bring them up right now, and let's have a conversation. If you want to post it, that's fine as well. I can read it out, or feel free to unmute yourself. I muted everybody, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask Jack any questions.
Dana had a question I missed. Is this just one site? Dana, what do you mean by one site?
I was just wondering how big your data set was for the different companies. Like, you were showing the percentages of which groups were accessing what type of data and whatnot. I was just wondering if that was through multiple companies, or was that at one company with multiple departments?
It's one company with multiple departments.
What do you think from your findings you would see with other companies? Do you think it would be very similar? I think it's a little different, I guess, with each size and difference of business, but like, do you think engineers would not touch customer data in an extremely large business, like versus a small business where, the engineers are typically in support as well, and they're working with customers to fix things, especially in more agile environments where they're deploying multiple times a day? they're having to look at customer data while they're, you know, making changes to their SaaS applications and whatnot.
Yeah, that's very two-pronged approach. Is when you're developing your products, you really want to enforce that actual customer data is not being used for your development efforts, however tempting that is. So really enforcing that rule. And the second part is comparing to other companies. I've been to other companies, so I can't say really for sure, but the general finding that I found was everyone wants to do their job, and unless you are very malicious and this is you're actively to extract data and run away from it, that's a very, very, very special malicious case. That
I don't think it's always malicious in nature. So, you know, I've been CTO of companies with 2 to 3 people in the engineering group. In one company, I had over 500, and I can tell you that there are times where what we see in engineering isn't what we see in the real world, and so we need some way to get data to that. So we actually had a team that was dedicated to scrubbing and sanitizing customer data, so we could get similar data sets into engineering, so we could evaluate why things were not functioning the way they're expected in a SaaS application. That's not always easy to do, but you know, it also falls down when some of these systems, we can't get access to all the data. So as an example, one of the companies that I own, we use HubSpot, and that data is extremely hard to manage and work with externally through their APIs. And we're always falling down when we're finding ways that malicious intended users are using our website to try to inject and do nasty things that we're not in control of because we are not the engineers of that application, but we have to trust that as a source of data. And so it becomes very interesting that we have to be able to look at this information to be able to understand what's going on.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you really can't solve a customer issue with the non-customer data set that you strive to have, then at the end of the day, you have to use customer data to solve that question. But what this effort does is being able to challenge these access events, say, was this your final resort? Was there another means to do it? And usually there's another way to do it. This is just the easy path, but there are a little bit harder, a little bit more cumbersome, but there are other ways to do it. And if your organization haven't enabled that behavior, because the tooling set and the way to reproduce and the way to develop is just way too hard, then there'd be more of a technical depth than people behaving, badly to their job. So also part of this effort was to have the capability to know who accessed what, and that provides a psychological barrier to people. We're not actively auditing you. We're not trying to find, misbehavior, but we have the capabilities and we're educating people to minimize access events, customer data access, however they can. And this will be your last resort to solve that customer ticket issue.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the response, Jack. Thanks for the question, Dana. And I posted the survey again on the chat. I've also sent the survey link to the people that are registered on Eventbrite. Also, don't forget to join our shiny new LinkedIn OWASP Vancouver group. Thanks, Jivan, for posting the link. We started this group a couple of weeks ago, and we'd like to invite you to all join, and you can keep abreast of top of the happenings with our chapter. And are there any questions or comments before we wrap up today's session? I guess this brings us to the end of it, and it's been great. I'd like to once again thank both of our speakers for the great presentations. And are there any comments, questions? Okay, if not, I'd like to close the session, and thanks to all of the volunteers that make these happen. And we will see you next time. Please keep your eyes and ears on the ground. Look at our LinkedIn group and website about the upcoming events that we'll be posting, including the OWASP AppSec Day that we're planning for early October, which is going to be quite exciting. Thanks, everyone.